Unlike Professor Valadeo, I'm not an academic. I am, however, for my sins, British and working in UNCTAD, which probably means that what I have to say is coloured by mythology and nostalgia to some extent, and you should take that into account when I make my presentation. I think in the program there, I'm down to speak a little bit on the LDC issues in the context of South-South cooperation. I will say something about that, but what I have to say are rather more general remarks. Some of them, I think, picking up from what the two speakers have already said. I guess I really want to make 3 points. One is that, and again, following on from what Professor Valadeo has just said, to understand the rise of the South over the course of the last couple of decades, you certainly need to take a global perspective on that. And there's a paradox there that is somewhat intriguing for people coming from UNCTAD, because for us the global environment over the last couple of decades, driven by a kind of neoliberal policy agenda, has by and large been detrimental to development prospects. At the same time, we have during that period seen the rise, and the quite remarkable rise, of a number of emerging economies, and understanding that combination, I think, is very important to both to understanding recent history and understanding the nature of the potential of South-South cooperation. And that's the second point, I guess, I want to make, is that South-South cooperation is very much work in progress. It's not a finished agenda. Its agenda, for it, if it is to work, will have to marry economic and political forces in the way that Ambassador Navarro talked about in the specific context of the ALBA countries, but we are far from being there yet. And I guess the third point that follows on from that I do want to try and make is that, and picks up a little bit from what Branislav just said, is that there is a need to de-link South-South cooperation from the aid agenda. I think a lot of the re-engagement with South-South in the World Bank and the IMF and the OECD has been very heavily tied to a very traditional aid and to some extent trade agenda. And I think if South-South cooperation is to move ahead, it will have to be much more strongly linked to an agenda of inclusive and sustainable development, which I guess is where UNCTAD and the next UNCTAD conference would like to take the South-South agenda over the coming years. So those are basically the 3 points that I want to make in my presentation. I realize we're running late, so I will try and keep it short. Globalization. I'm not going to try and give an exposition to this audience on globalization and what it is. We're all familiar with the neoliberal agenda, the rise of markets, and the dominant role of transnational corporations in shaping the world economy over the last 2 or 3 decades. But it's not really the most important feature of globalization over this period. The most important feature of globalization over this period, as Professor Valadeo suggested, is the rise of finance. What we've seen over the last 2 or 3 decades is what in UNCTAD we have been calling finance-driven globalization. And that reflects the extensive deregulation of the financial sector in advanced countries, followed somewhat later by a number of developing countries. It's about the dismantling of controls over cross-border financial activities. It's about the surge of capital flows that has followed on a huge scale, gross capital flows. And it's fundamentally about a break with the kind of international post-war policy order that was constructed in Bretton Woods after the Second World War. The consequence of the rise of financial interests that has accompanied that break with the international post-war policy framework has been an erosion of the kinds of checks and balances, both at the national and the international levels, that essentially tied finance to the productive economy. That was a very important feature of a lesson that was taken by the architects of the post-war era after the experiences of the 1930s, and the need to tie down finance was a critical feature of the architecture that was created after 1945. As that architecture has been eroded, we have seen the return of short-term thinking. We've seen the return of speculative activities over productive activities. We've seen the rise, in particular, of voluminous levels of debt, both in the private and the public sector, as essentially the new engine of growth, particularly in the advanced countries, but also significantly in many developing countries as well. On top of that, you have an ideological support system built around such notions as the efficient market and the one-size-fits-all approach to economic policy, which has essentially driven the kind of political and economic agenda in many developed and many developing countries over the last 2 or 3 decades. The importance of that history to understand, I think, is that whilst a lot of the conventional discussion of globalization is essentially about this being a natural force, the product of technology, something that is irresistible and unresistible, in fact, globalization as we know it is very much the product of policies and politics, as I think Professor Valadao was hinting at. And it's very important when you recognize that as a consequence, it's not something that is God-given, it's something that is changeable. And the importance of recognizing the policy and political underpinnings of globalization, I think, is imperative to the search for the kinds of alternatives that Professor Navarro was talking about in the context of the Alba region. The 3 features of finance-driven globalization that I think we want to focus on in the context of an organization like UNCTAD is first of all that despite the rhetoric, despite all the talk about the strength of the global economy, about the innovativeness and entrepreneurial spirit that has been unleashed over the last 2 or 3 decades by these changes, at the global level, economic growth has been on a systematically slowing trend over the last 2 to 3 decades. Productive investment, has been stagnant in large parts of the world, both developed and developing. There have been rising levels of inequality within countries on a systematic basis, and there has been a remarkable degree of economic instability and shocks that have characterized this period. So when you look at this period and certainly compare it to the bad old days of government intervention and Keynesian excesses, it is a period that does not stack up very well in terms of economic performance. It's also a period that we all now know has ended very badly. The financial crisis that hit in 2008 was the culmination of crises that had been fairly familiar, particularly to developing countries, throughout the 80s and the 90s. It's just that it hit home in the core this time and on a level that I think many people did not anticipate. But UNCTAD, for example, has been warning about the dangers of excessive financial liberalization and deregulation since at least the early 1990s, when we warned Mexico that it was running into this kind of crisis, when we warned Southeast Asia that it was facing these kinds of problems in 1996, as we warned Latin America in the late 1990s that this kind of playing with financial fire was likely to end in tears. So the fact that it's ended badly has come as an apparent shock to those people that have promoted finance-driven globalization. For those that look at it from a development perspective, it's something that is remarkably familiar to us.